What's up, everyone? Welcome to the 25th episode of Super Brain Radio, the protocols episode for Chapter 5, Surfing, which is all about traversing the highs and lows on the micro scale on a long term conquest that is usually pretty linear when you look at your rate of succession. So, what we're going to cover today is not just the last four episodes in a specific manner that has to do with results and goal attainment, but in a usual fashion, I'm going to pair them. And what spoke to me for today is kind of this mind body association and how they're kind of an integral axis leaning on each other when it comes to being excellent on your way to whatever excellent means to you. So, first, we're going to cover the body and how your ability to manipulate biology through food and exercise to either gain some muscle better, we'll say, and lose some fat better, we'll say. You'll see why it's arbitrary when I get into it, and I don't want to get ahead of myself just yet. And we're going to weigh that against and with how being in the moment and becoming elite are going to have three C's that we go over to ensuring you can do both of those and how they're integrated into each other. So it's going to be pretty cool. I'm going to try to keep it succinct because in its entirety, these are things I could easily rant about forever. So I have some notes in front of me for one of the few times, or maybe the only time I've actually ever done that for this show, and it's just to keep me on track. So if you notice that I might be talking rushed or anything like that, it's because I'm trying to keep my discerning thoughts at bay, rants, and anything that, might impede moving in a straightforward line, which is kind of ironically funny in a way related to the episode. So let's begin with fat loss and how more of understanding how you attain the skill of fat loss for yourself is going to be what we're essentially looking to gain from it rather than getting fat off your body and maintaining it or gaining it back. In relativity, it doesn't actually matter. What matters if you know how to do that for yourself. And my goal here is to give you some tips on what compounding things can I do to give myself and my biology the skill of fat loss. And from a biological perspective, the reason it's important actually has nothing to do with the anticipated answer of health and your organs and all this crap because we're actually talking about getting better, and that's a prerequisite that we covered a long time ago. So more importantly, we want to talk about if you can have the biological skill to lose fat, what you can really do is have the neurological ability to refine things, to increase efficiency and all of that stuff. And coincidentally, if you can somehow gain that same skill on the reciprocal side, building muscle, having to do with building new things and recruiting new employees, as we're going to talk about, then you can continue to learn, but learn things in new fashions using more parts of your brain, more blood, more electricity, more metabolism to get them done, which is going to cost more energy. So that's the approach we're taking to the muscle gain fat loss paradox that kind of, is a carrot that all humans inherently chase. So that's why I think it's a win-win here for everybody. When it comes to fat loss, and we talked about how food has an adaptive perspective we should take. Let's talk about following your food day to day in kind of a bell curve. What I so vaguely recommend is that your AM and PM meals, the first breakfast and your final dinner, are going to be devoid of carbohydrates. We want these to have to do with ingesting protein and fat mainly. This is the proper time, in my opinion, to include boluses of minerals, to include some vegetables, to include fiber, and all that stuff. When the sun's at its peak hours through the middle of the day, that's when I recommend you intervene with carbohydrates and try to remove as much fat as possible from those meals. Now, recognize that I'm not talking about calories, and I will not talk about calories. I've actually made the argument for years at this point that I actually don't even think they exist. Our body just doesn't process glucose and fats equally in the same environments. And furthermore, there are so many just classic conditions and things we see in our day to day life that show us that calories don't mean anything. We've just programmed ourselves to use calories as our counting tool, which is fine. I don't have anything about against it to be a counting tool, but in reality, it's just a ruler. It's nothing more than a ruler. So we're talking about terms of substrate, so what you're putting in, and how we're going to separate those in like a carbohydrate bell curve, if you will. This is going to ensure that you're training your liver and the enzyme systems that transport these things, as well as your gut, to be able to handle both fuels that our bodies can run on. We use fats and carbohydrates at the same time, but they have different jobs, and we need to be good at both of those jobs. So you may notice that at first your energy levels are a little bit up and down, and you might not. Many people do not. But if you do, that's giving you insight onto which fuel you struggle with a little bit more. And over time, less than 4 weeks it should be for most people, you'll notice that your energy flatlines, it feels better than before. Along the way, your body composition is going to be better as long as you eat like a responsible adult and don't use knowledge as the justification to eat more. And if you actually follow true zero carbohydrates, not including vegetables as a part of that count, but true glucose driven or fructose driven carbohydrates, if you really don't eat any at dinner and then try to get as close to zero fat as possible and not including like negligible fat from chicken breast or some granola or something like that, same scenario, then it actually sorts out a lot of the food options for you as well. So there's minimal thinking involved. Along this fat loss skill opportunity, what you need to do, and what I mean by increasing efficiency, is be good at what's called parasympathetic beta oxidation. Now, it's a fancy term that describes exactly how we're recycling energy. And what that means is we need to be exceptional with having fat be our primary energy source when our heart rate is low, regardless of what we're doing with that low heart rate. But when your heart rate is truly at rest, we would ideally love to believe that nearly 100% of those, you know, energetic molecules, if you will, are coming from fats to keep us alive at rest, keep us cognitive, and all those things. One of the awesome ways to facilitate this is through blood vessel training. And this is another adaptive compounding effect you're going to seek to gain. Is sure something that will certainly derive acute results, but the real magic comes later on. What I mean by blood vessel training is having contrasting amounts of constriction and dilation through exercise. Now, also, you might be thinking, Andy, that still makes no sense, and I understand that. So, I'm going to give you some scenarios. And these scenarios include going for a slow nasal breathing walk or jog and only using nasal breathing. Sure, this is going to have the same oxygen carbon dioxide stuff roughly that you normally have, but it's altering how the blood vessels act in response and how you deal with that oxygen carbon dioxide exchange ratio called our respiratory exchange ratio. Now, once you finish a 4 to 12-minute bout of that, you can go into a hard, aggressive sprint of some sort. Or it could just be an exercise that mimics a style breathing. As you go back and forth between those, we're actually creating enzymatic change that supports that our ability to use fat easily when the heart rate is low, as well as the nutrition. You do these in synergy, and 1 plus 1 suddenly equals 3. Now, on that muscle building reciprocal side, when we talk about recruitment, When we talk about efficiency, we're really refining our approach in sword. When we talk about recruitment and muscle, what we're talking about here is our ability to use timely amounts of more glucose and amino acids than needed, pairing that with some very specific style exercise I call creatine work, and being able to be versatile in your usage of the skill and task at hand. So, what I mean by timely amounts of food are that, let's say you're doing a skill that you're already good at, and we're in this period of recruitment, meaning we're getting new employees. And whenever you train a new employee, it's not free. You need to spend hours and invest time into them to mature them into the employee you want. And that analogy works freakishly well for muscle building. So, if you want to do those things, you need to subject yourself to a versatile environment. So, if your skill is darts, you should probably get decent at doing darts on one leg, doing darts when your heart rate is high, doing darts when you're actually maybe a little sleepy and still off, but trying to use the same exact form, and so on and so forth. Exposing yourself to those things is inherently going to need more substrate and energy to recover from that. So, this is a perfect opportunity after you've participated in skill practice to have more amino acids and protein than normal and to have more pure glucose than normal, that zero fat carb we talked about. Doing that in conjunction with that specific training is going to make an acute but profound effect on your ability to recruit more employees system wide. These muscle gain and fat loss skills are really talked about here in this podcast episode as the brain's skills and tools, and how that relates to learning, getting better, and surfing as a whole. Keep that in mind, guys. Now, as we switch to the 3 C's of being in the moment and becoming elite, we're going to need to remember that as you get better at anything, it gets harder to continually get better. And that's when this applies the most. And with that, it should actually bring some motivation in that it's a badge of honor to be able to relate and use things in an elite manner that help other elite skill users and participants. The first of the 3 C's is conviction. And this may come, natural to some people or be very logical to others. However, it is something that we have physiological recordings of. When people have true, deep, authentic faith in what they're doing, when people have a hug, and when people authentically pray, the physiology of the brain is actually eerily similar. What that tells us and shows us as well is that its linking factor is conviction and faith. If you are inherently so thrilled, enthused, and driven to do what you want to do, it's not just saying it, acting it, it's believing it, and the physiological benefit of believing it to that degree that is actually going to make a difference for you. The next is having a central premise. And what I mean by that is not as much as what you'd expect. I'm not talking about morals and philosophies. I'm actually talking about having an integral, tangible piece of your skill or task that you feel the most tied to. When I work with people in fine skills like golf or maybe more gross skills like football, we consistently talk about what is the feeling that you notice when things are at their best? And that's how we determine training protocols. That's how we determine skill practice and all of that. We even link that back to conviction. Because if you can feel something that increases your ability to have faith, now that 1 + 1 = 3 analogy becomes even more specific. The last C is actually the one we need to talk about the most and kind of makes the most sense when we talk about Ghost Superbrain as like the company title, it's concise. And what I mean by that is getting into a flow state in under 2 minutes. You need to have the meditative skills, the imagination skills, the self discipline skills, and everything related to that in order for you to get into a flow state in the first place. If you want to be elite at anything, I think you need to be able to do that in under 2 minutes. And the reason I believe that is because the amount of participation you need at an elite level of anything to be good and to continue being good allows a lot of frequent repetition. And if you can't participate in frequent repetition in your specific flow state, then you're actually not suited and you're not in quote unquote good enough shape to participate in your skill at the level you're currently at. So that also brings into question, what is your weakest link? What's going to stop you from doing what you need to do? And how can you combat that? So you really need not just daily meditation in general to attain skill in the first place, but you need daily practice related to your sport specific skills to make them real and to manifest the absolute best from them that you can.